Yeah, I've been around it. I've never done it, but I had a friend in high school, and his cousin was addicted to coke. And this was like when this was a formative period of my life when I was doing martial arts. And for the longest time, like from age 15 to 21, I did no partying. All I did was train. I mean, I trained every day. I ate clean. I slept well.
How old were you?
15 to 21. From 15 to 21. Those were like, high school.
How'd you get into that?
Man, well, I was bullied like most people. I didn't know how to fight. I was scared. And I was like, I need to learn how to fight. And I joined a martial arts school, and I just got obsessed with it.
Because that's early. Like that, the reason I'm asking, that's before the trend of MMA.
Yeah, but martial arts had always been around. And, I was a big Bruce Lee fan, Chuck Norris fan. Watched a bunch of those movies and shit. And I was, God, man, amazing to do that. How cool would it be to be able to do that? And then I watched a bunch of kickboxing matches, and I got into it. And then coming home from a Red Sox game, it's a crazy story. I would already been taking karate a little bit, but it was too far from my house. It was hard to get there. My parents didn't want to drive me. And this place was right off the tee. So I was at Fenway Park with a buddy of mine, went to see a baseball game, and then I was like 14 or 15. And when we were walking home from the baseball game, there was so many people waiting in line for the tee. You know how it is after the game.
Yeah.
So we decided to just fucking walk upstairs and see what this Taekwondo school was all about. And as I was walking up the stairs, I was hearing this sound, and it was like, whoomp, ka-chink. Like, it was whoomp, ka-chink. And what it was this guy kicking this heavy bag, and the bag was flying, and the ka-chink was the chains that was holding the bag. And I got up there at the top of the stairs and watched this guy, John Lee, who was the national champion, who was training for the World Cup. So he's at his peak of training. And he was doing a spinning back kick over and over again into this heavy bag. And I remember watching it, and I could not believe what he could do. I couldn't believe the power that this guy could generate in that kick. And he became like a mentor to me. And this guy who was like this wild street guy from Chelsea, Massachusetts, who was this elite Taekwondo fighter. Like, he wasn't like, like bow. Like, he was like, hey, what's up, man? What the fuck you doing, man? He was a funny dude. He would like eat food right before he fought. Fuck these people, man. I'm gonna fuck these dudes up. He was a street guy who was really good at martial arts. I mean, he bowed and said yes, sir, to everybody and all that stuff. But when people were not around, he was just cool. He was hanging out. He had drug problems. There was a lot going on. But in that moment where I saw him, he was 27 years old. He was in the prime of his career, and he was the elite of the elite.
And that's how you got hooked.
I got hooked behind the thing. I went there the next day. I signed up, and I was there every fucking day. Every day. Yeah, I became obsessed.
Interesting.
So I didn't want to do anything that fucked me up. And my friend Jimmy, his cousin, was selling coke. And I knew his cousin Mike from like when he wasn't selling coke. Like, he was a mechanic, he's a cool guy, fixed my car for me. He was a fucking guy from the neighborhood. We hang out with him. And then him and his girl got into coke bad. He was selling coke, and then he was just fucking just emaciated. He looked like he got bit by a vampire. And they would hide in they had an attic apartment. They would just go in that attic apartment and do coke every day. And I was like, fuck coke.
That's hardcore to get like hooked like that.
He got hooked. Well, he was also selling it.
Yeah.
So he had all this access to coke. But it was people in the neighborhood. I saw them doing coke, and they just wanted to do coke all the time. They wanted to get out and do coke. And as a kid who was like, finally, I was a loser my whole life. And then finally, when I was 15, I found this thing that I got obsessed with that changed the way people looked at me. Like, now all of a sudden I was good at something, like really good at something. And then I became state champion 4 years in a row, and I won the U.S. Open, and I won these national tournaments, and it was a big fucking deal for me. So I was like, I am not doing anything that jeopardizes that.
Right.
And coke to me was the big one. Like, I knew that was it. I feel like if I got drunk, in which I did occasionally, I would feel like shit the next day. I couldn't train well. I was hungover, and I'd get beat up in sparring. I was like, I can't do this. So I just cut most partying. Like, I smoked pot a handful of times. I got drunk a handful of times during high school and in my early 20s. And then I just, in the comedy world, coke was a problem with there too. I saw when I used to work at Nick's Comedy Stop in Boston.
Yeah, sure.
and they offered to pay me in coke or money. Like when you work there for a weekend, like you want to get paid in coke or you want to get paid money.
And even trade, like same amount of coke, the dollar
some guys
value.
went half. Yeah, some guys went half.
I guess if you like it, it's easy access.
There were so many guys that got hooked on coke. I knew so many guys that had coke problems that I was like, that is a pitfall. Like I wanted to succeed, and I felt like that was one. And also, it was a drug that got you hyped up, and I liked being hyped up. And my friend Jimmy said this to me. He goes, "Don't do coke. You'll like it." I was like, oh, no. I'll never forget this. It was me and my friend Steve. We were driving home from Kelly's Roast Beef in Revere, Massachusetts.
Yep.
And we're
overrated.
Yeah, it's a little overrated.
The beef is, but
yeah, the clams are pretty good.
Yeah.
So we were driving, and there was a car next to us, and they had the dome light on, and there was a girl in the back seat doing blow off a mirror. So she's there doing blow, and she looks over at us, and I'm looking over to her, and she goes, just for no reason, just fuck you.
I mean, that's Revere Beach.
But that's coke too.
Yeah.
And I was like, no coke. And then I also had another buddy who got arrested, who was selling coke, and he got arrested for murder. And this was a scary murder where they beat.
How close were you with this guy?
He's a training partner of mine.
Yeesh.
Yeah, I knew him very well. I don't think he did that murder. He might have did that murder. He did some shit. He wound up going to jail. He went to jail for quite a long time, quite a few years, and then he came out, and he was just a totally different person. He came out super jacked, and he had a bunch of like really bad tattoos, and all of them were now these heavy keloid scars. Like he had like burned off his tattoos or cut off his tattoos or some shit. I don't know what he did in prison. He was real vague about it, but when he came out, like he was a fucking different human. He was an animal. You didn't want, if you sparred him, like when we sparred, they weren't sparring matches. They were fights. Like they were full on fights. Like we would spar like we were trying to kill each other. It was very dangerous. And he was I knew he was selling coke and doing coke. And then he got arrested for this murder where they took this guy. And again, I don't know if he did it, but he did get arrested and then released. They broke all the bones in this guy's body with a hammer, and they kept injecting him with cocaine to keep him awake.
What?
Yeah. And then they cut his hands off, and they cut his head off, and then they left his body somewhere. And I think the idea of cutting his hands off was to hide his fingerprints. And then this dude got arrested for that crime. And I was like, geez. So it was more evidence to me like coke is fucking crazy business.